From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
The question I had for you to get started today, and this is like something I've been thinking a lot as like we've been making more content. Like you've heard me make the jokes around like you having a comb over and like doing the, what are we calling it? The
quaff.
The quaff. Yeah. Like the B2B quaff, like you gotta, part of being a influencer or standing out is like big part of it is your looks. Like whether you look different or unique or you're incredibly good looking, like there's like benefits to looking a certain way, but that's only like obviously that's only a small part of it, but it is going to like help set you apart. So the other thing that I was thinking about, I was actually talking to Jay about this and like with his like acting background and stuff, because part of I think like being good looking on camera is the ability to make facial expressions that like aren't overdoing it. Because I like, listen, I want to do more like skit style content. I think it's like so fun, but when you actually look at like the end result of it, I'm like, wow, my face is like fucking overdoing it. Like it's like overacting. And I think that the people who are good at content are that type of content have like this way of like doing like subtle facial expressions. Like this is still like Todd Clouser, right? People follow him and be like, he has like this nice subtle way. If you watch like the Corporate Bro film series that they just came out with, like with Corporate Natalie and all of those like influencers that do all this skit style content, like they just like, it's almost like they continue to look good while they have like unique facial expressions, right? And I feel like whenever I do the face, and part of this I wonder is like, is it just me watching my own crap that I just like can't, it's like you can't look at your own voice, you can't hear your own voice, and you can't look at your own face as you make these silly facial expressions? Or are some people better at doing facial expressions than others? It's gotta be part of it. Well, like are some, is it, I guess, can you learn that? Like, is it something that can be taught? Can I go and practice in a mirror and look less stupid on camera? I guess is the question.
I mean, I guess, yeah. You can go to acting school. It does not fall under education reimbursement.
But do some people's do some people naturally have like better facial expressions that make them better skit people? Or like can it be taught, or is it obviously, I think some of it can be taught, but is most of it natural?
I think it's mostly natural, and then the stuff that gets taught is like the fine tuning of it for the situation and the, you know, the scenario that you're thrown into. Maybe it's like a tragedy or a rom-com or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got like some people must. Yeah, because if you think different actors and actresses are known for like certain things, right? I think that has to do with their demeanor and facial expressions.
So what do you want to be known for? Not looking stupid on camera?
Yeah, I don't want to I always think of like, we did this video in high school. It was called Cooking with Cosby. So like it was cooking with Bill Cosby.
I remember you showing me that one time.
Yeah, so like we did this video, and one of my friends who was like he was the good actor, the good facial expressions. He was Bill Cosby, had this great Bill Cosby accent, and they were cooking bald eagle burgers. And my one friend who is like honestly I don't know, that guy in the group, he was like the entire like audience, and he just like was the worst actor in the face of the earth. And I feel like that's how I look on camera sometimes, like just like so over exaggerated. So
not trustworthy?
No, not trustworthy. Fake, not authentic. Yeah, I think that part of like you have like part of those videos is being authentic, and like should you just try to like be yourself and your own personality, or should you try to take on the persona that you're trying to be?
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my awkward segue into today's topic around the idea that we've been kicking around over the last, we'll say 24 hours or less, or a content distribution framework that's built on trust. And ultimately, how you go about picking the right messenger for distributing your content, your message, and ultimately driving growth for your business. Now, we all know as marketers, as individuals and consumers, that people buy from people. We trust certain sources of information based off of what they've done for us in the past, who they are, the valued opinions and points of view that they bring to the table. And when it all comes down to it, we know, as James mentioned before on a previous episode or a couple episodes, what's your tagline as far as buying with emotion but making decisions?
Oh, people buy on emotion and justify with logic.
There you go. So that's why we felt, let's bring this idea to the table and start to talk through that, because there's some validity to it at the end of the day, not just as it relates to B2B brands and complex sales and all of those buyer journey metaphors that exist out there that is in the tech space and those businesses that we work with, but really reverberates across the entire realm of marketing and consumer behavior. So James, why don't you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think it's time to put some action to some of the buzzwordy phrases that we put out there. People buy from people and not brands is one that we throw out all the time. And what you and I have been kind of riffing back and forth on is like when we build out a content strategy, so much of that is built around what the messaging needs to be and not as much like who that message needs to come from. Because I mean, we focus so much on, okay, we did our persona research. These are the people that we want to target. This is where they hang out. We know everything about our customers. I don't think we're going to get into that in crazy detail today, but okay, so we know all this stuff and we know the messaging that we want to resonate with them. But people don't trust brands in that way, right? Like you put out content from your brand page, it's marketing material. You put the content on your website, it's marketing material. Like to an extent, there's value in saying the right things there. Like those are things that almost are like things that you have to have in place. But if we go back to the phrase of people buy from people and not brands, like what's the distribution channel for that? And this is where I think that we need to rethink how content is distributed and focus on who does that content need to come from in order to build trust, because there's a lot of marketing at this point that people read through. I mean, we were talking about say G2 reviews and stuff like that the other day, like all this bought content, like people definitely read through that now. You're seeing more B2B influencer plays. Is that more trustworthy? But again, it's like, I think what we're going to talk through today is what's the right way to serve that message through, I guess, like the right medium. We're really talking about distribution channels, but it's more in line with like, who is that message actually coming from?
Yeah. I mean, how do you create a source of trust that is built based off of not just your personas, your ICPs, and the topical content pillars that come out of that, and not just the distribution channels, but really the ones that are out there either on behalf of your brand or on behalf of yourself, that is the one that somebody's actively engaging with, whether directly or indirectly, and the ones that are actually pushing the needle for the business. Like, how many times have we run into a challenge? This is rhetorical. Don't answer this because I know the answer. But how many times have we run into a situation where, we're running this massive campaign and the content just sucks. It just does not live up to the hype of what the campaign is capable of doing. And it's not just the content, it's the messaging and the sources of information and sources of trust that are wrapped into that campaign strategy. There's a Gartner report, there's a Forrester report, there's these ebooks, these white papers. It's all of this material being put out by the brand. And as we know, as you just rightly pointed out, like we know it's marketing fodder, it's marketing material, it's biased. Obviously, you're selling yourself. You're paying Gartner, you're paying Forrester commission-based fees to put out content on your behalf. And there's not something that's authentic in that. It's not genuine. It's not this people first, buy from people approach. And I think that's the big thing that, where we want to take today's episode is how do we move past this traditional mindset of personas and ICPs leading into content pillars, leading into distribution networks, and rethink all of that and not lose sight of who is the actual entity distributing that message. Where is that message coming from? Is it coming from the brand? Is it coming from a paid influencer, an influencer that you're not paying, but is just a brand advocate because they are a customer that has been given so much value of what they've been able to achieve by working with you?
So one thing here, though, that I want to hit on is that we're not talking about like doing things like completely different and like we're like your brand shouldn't put out messages, right? Like there's value from each touch points, whether it's like something that's customer driven or put out by your brand, like all of these different people who are, in theory, like talking about your brand and marketing your brand in different ways. It's those distribution strategies work together. Like you should still post to your LinkedIn brand page. You should still have a website. There are basic, I think the thing that I feel like we're probably going to harp on a lot is that like brands are maybe overdoing it with some of their, brand level distribution and to do more personalized stuff. But there's a role for each of those. And I think where that role comes from is the different stages of the customer journey, right? Like somebody's going to be asking for reviews on your product later in the customer journey where, early on they're going to visit your website. They're going to look at your G2 reviews. They're going to, make sure that you have your brand covered and kind of what your, they're going to look to see what your unique selling point is and stuff like that. But when it comes down to pushing somebody over the edge, that's where I think there's different, like other distribution channels are going to come into place that are a lot more personal.
And it goes even before that then. Perceptions and assumptions are made about what you offer and what you do before anybody ever visits your website. I mean, I got served up, this, we were just talking about it at lunch. I mean, I got served up an ad for a fishing combo that you told me about a couple weeks ago that I've been in the market for, saw it's on sale. And my perception and my assumption was based off of what we talked about in the car driving to fishing. And I have that validity. I have that validation, so to speak, of, yeah, this is a good purchase based off of what I've seen, what I've heard from you as a trusted source, as the expert amateur fisherman on Instagram. And the same thing goes for other areas of purchasing. I mean, Brandon Beck from Mint Measure, we had him on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and he's a great resource that we stay in touch with offline and via LinkedIn. Him and I were catching up the other day, and we were talking about, different areas of opportunity when it comes to our own marketing. And he mentioned Apollo.io as, a possible tool to check out. I trust Brandon's opinion. I trust his point of view. I trust him as a fellow marketer that knows his shit. And what it does is it gives me that perception and assumption that, look, maybe I should go check out Apollo. Maybe I should see if they're worth having a demo with and let my own purchase path kind of continue from there. But it's all being built out of those circles of influence and circles of trust that have been built.
Part of that's luck, though. I got to say, those examples that you just gave were a little bit of luck. The iPhone listening to you was, I got an ad. I was driving behind this like electric bike on my road going 45 miles an hour. And I was like super impressed. And somehow I got like an ad for the bike. Stuff like that happens, but and like word of mouth or like personal experiences are always going to resonate more than brand content. And maybe, that's kind of what we're getting in here is like that additional validity is super important.
Yeah. And trust is built through different mediums. It's not just written content, right? It's built through visuals. It's built through verbal communications. I mean, think about the perception and assumption you make about a brand if they are putting out shoddy creative, shoddy visuals, low res, pixelated, things like that. It is an interpretation of the type of product and service that they provide. Low res, low visuals, low creative means low quality product. I'm not buying from you because of the interpretation and assumption I'm making from what you're putting out from a marketing and materials perspective. Same thing goes from a high end thing, right? Somebody puts out really great creative. Somebody is out there and they are creating demand on their behalf, and you hear about them through your various circles of influence, various circles of trust. You are therefore more trusting of them at an initial research point than the vice versa.
So here's where the debate comes in, though. Let's talk about the authenticity of those two things, right? So super high end, well produced, whatever. I don't know. Say us as a marketing agency, right? And we produce like we do really. We were talking about this the other day. Should we hire one of our video partners to start doing some like really high end video, because maybe that could help us kind of help build out our own content portfolio a little bit more. If we start putting out really high, like really well put together, overthought content, is it going to come out as like fake and marketing material versus, hey, me cropping out my headshot on a TikTok and doing a Google Ads audit and sharing like some short form video? Like what is going to come off as more authentic, and what's going to sell better for us at the end of the day? And I think, I don't know, there's like a mix of both is helpful.
Comes back to those personas though, right? So an executive purchaser is going to look at the slick video and think, oh shit, man, they know what they're doing, versus seeing those low res TikTok videos and they're going to be like, okay, whatever. Like these guys don't produce high quality content. They don't know what they're doing, because otherwise what they would be putting out would be much higher quality on behalf of themselves. If you move lower in the food chain, right, as far as that decision-making tree is concerned, I bet you a marketing manager is going to see that like cropped headshot video, and it's going to resonate with them because it feels more authentic to them and more aligned to who they are rather than the executive. They may not see through the slick kind of view of the creative necessarily, but I feel like they're going to be more likely to resonate with the creative and the medium based off of who they are. I mean, at the end of the day, right, you can shine a turd as much as you want. It's still a turd at the end of the day. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the content has to be entertaining, engaging, serve the right message, right? That's the most important thing. If I really wow you in a short form video with my Google Ads skills, kind of with some, I don't know, state of the art stuff, like that could go a lot further than, me throwing out a bunch of buzzwords in a high end anthem video.
Right. You mean you don't want to do what we were talking about like a couple of weeks ago about having ChatGPT rewrite songs as parodies with B2B jargon?
I mean, I think the entertainment factor is important, though. I mean, if you can because again, that is more so portraying like your brand. If we're an agency that serves law firms or only like government contracts, like I think we want to be a little bit more serious versus tech startups. Everybody's trying to stand out and be different. Like there's pros to being different and funny and standing out.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing goes for this podcast. We curse, we riff, we rip on each other, we rip on our guests because we're real people, and we try to make it fun. We try to make it like personable and informal. And the hope is that the people listening, whether they're customers or not, see us as real people and are like, yeah, those are the two guys and the team that they work with that I would want to go have a beer with, talk about marketing, and ultimately work together, because the 5% of my day that I'm working with somebody like them, I want to have it be the best 5% of my day, because the other 95% is going to suck. I'm going through spreadsheets. I'm dealing with all kinds of internal bullshit and everything else. And I want to have that 5% be with those guys because they know what they're doing and they are going to have fun doing it.
We just want you to like us.
We just want you to like us. Just all the likes and reactions.
Not the vanity likes. We want you to like us.
Right. So the one key piece here, though, too, and this is a question that I have in our notes that I don't know if you're prepared to answer per se, is like, as a brand side marketer or an agency that's putting together this content idea of sources of trust, like, how does a brand or a marketer know who that persona is actually going to trust? Like, what are those key insights that we should be trying to glean out of our research to define that strategy?
This one's interesting. I mean, part of it goes back to that ICP persona research and trying to figure out like where your audience like who your audience is and where they hang out, and figuring out like what they're doing on each of those channels, what communities they're part of, and honestly, part of that I think is like more so like influencer research, kind of figuring out like how, because each industry is connected differently, right? Some industries, everybody might meet up and go to a specific trade show. In some industries, everybody's in private communities. In some industries, everybody's on LinkedIn. And then just like finding out who those core influencers are and how they're delivering their message. And I would try to mimic that. That's kind of again, it's going to be different for everybody. And I think as we break down, like, one of the things that we're going to talk about here is like the traditional pillars of owned, earned, and bought content, and kind of how we're, I don't know, thinking of a different way of viewing it. And I think as we get into that, we'll be able to kind of riff off some ideas of different ways that you can position that content and what that content should be positioned for.
The biggest thing in that research phase is the feedback loop that has to be created when you're developing those personas, when you're really refining that ICP, right? Going out there and having real tangible conversations with your customers, your prospects, people that are in the market, and understanding who they consider trustworthy. Where do they go for their information? Not necessarily channels and distribution points, but real sources of trust. Do they go to Gartner? Do they go to G2? Do they go to,
Reddit.
Billy? What's that?
Said Reddit.
Reddit. Do they go to Reddit? Do they go to Billy in procurement because he's the one that has to tell me what I have to do? Or is it, this group that, we meet up every 3 months because we're part of this community that you can't actually ever see or know about, but it exists? Like, I think there are much fewer people that give a shit about LinkedIn influencers than what it seems. Like, if you think about all the clients that we work with over the course of time, and we throw names in this podcast, Chris Walker, Todd Clauser, like, how many of our clients really know who the hell we're even talking about? Less than 5% is my opinion, if not zero.
Yeah. No, and those are like, there's different, and that's where like there's different sub communities. Like those, they are the most active people on LinkedIn within the B2B marketing space. And like, if you are active on LinkedIn, like, yeah, you're going to know who those people are. But the thing is that most don't.
And I think that's the important thing that I want to kind of bring to a head here is they're the least active on LinkedIn, yet they probably make up the majority of the market, whether that is buyers of agency services like ours, or buyers of the brands that we work with, or the brands that we don't work with, but still make up a majority of the B2B marketing world. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is like, the spheres of influence, the spheres of trust, you need to think beyond like the traditional channels and the distribution pillars, as you were talking about before, of owned, earned, and bought, because we have to rethink about who's generating the content. Before we get into that, though, I think you wanted to bring up kind of that owned, earned, bought perspective as a jumping off point before we talk about what we're calling, let's say, new pillars, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really just kind of how we are currently lumping content distribution channels right now. So there's your own content, think like your website, your blog, your SEO strategy. That's all stuff that you kind of own, have complete control over. Earned is more around customer reviews, stuff like that, kind of like third party verification that you've reserved via content, and then bought, ads, purchased reviews. I think that bought can be we always think of advertising first, but there's like trade show content. There's like basically anything that you ended up paying for that you can, I don't know, see through, so to speak. And it's just like when we loop, I feel like a lot of times when we are developing a content strategy, because we're budgeting for certain things and expecting certain things, like we group categorize content this way. And I think what we're talking about, the shift of making, instead of having these three buckets, more so focus on who the messenger is going to be of what that message is at the end of the day. And Andy, I'm not sure if you want to start going into those categories that we outlined, but I think that's the next thing here.
Yeah, I think own, earned, and bought are still part of the process, but they are later in the process than what most marketers consider. And to your point, it's who's the one that's crafting and really delivering the message. And we view this as, we put together 4 pillars. There's brand generated, market generated, employee generated, and customer generated. And they kind of fall within that same mentality of own, earned, bought, but more so as it relates to the content itself, the messaging, and the positioning of that content as far as that source of trust is concerned. So let's kick this off with brand generated content. It is exactly what it says it is. It's content that's being generated by the brand. Think about it. Blogs, white papers that you're creating internally, infographics, product sheets, data sheets, tech specs, right? All of your social posts that are being put out on behalf of the brand. It's all content that you're curating and creating on behalf of yourself. And inherently, at the end of the day, you're controlling the narrative. You're controlling what it is going to say, the way in which it's being said, the visual elements to it. But from the consumer side of things, if I'm seeing that, or anybody in your market sees that, they know that it's coming from you. They know that there's a bias inherently behind it because you're the one that's putting it out. You're going to obviously put yourself in the most positive light you can possibly find. Why else would you not? So there is an inherent bias to that. And therefore, the level of trust behind it can be skewed. There can be certainly a level of trust if I'm brand aware. I've been made to assume that, hey, this brand knows their shit. They have a great product. And the stuff that I'm seeing has been validating my assumptions of that. Or if I have no idea who they are, I'm coming into it with a clean slate. And I inherently know that there's a bias because I'm trying to be sold to.
So where do we think this content is going to be the most effective in the buyer's journey? Because that's like one thing, I think that's what we want to break down with each of these, because there's 2 things. There's the level of authenticity that needs to be in place for each of these channels. Brand content is going to be the least authentic, and maybe there's a marketing play there to make it feel more authentic, but generally speaking, is going to be the least authentic because you're curating that message. But also at like the buyer's journey, where does it come into place? We talked about like, this is the stuff that decision makers are going to look at just kind of as like a final confirmation for prior to making something. At this point, like maybe somebody already recommended them to you. Maybe they've seen other marketing materials. Like, I feel like there's a lot of confirmation-based messaging that's brand generated. Like who's going to check out your LinkedIn business page? Like pretty much nobody, in case they just want to like see and make sure you're legit. Like, oh, looking into this social media marketing agency, let's see if they actually practice what they preach, right? That's like step 1. But also like, it's probably helpful like very, very early on to think about like brand awareness campaigns, just like the overall look and feel of your brand and the message associated with it is going to hit early on. But a lot of like the middle of the buyer's journey researching phase, like, I don't know how important brand messaging is there. Maybe like, do you have the integrations that you need for a certain software and stuff like that? But again, that's kind of more verification on my end, where the research of like, do you actually like working with these people, is not really going to come from the brand.
I like how you're saying middle of the journey instead of middle of the funnel. Way to catch yourself on that, because the funnel's dead.
Did I catch myself? That's just how it's natural at this point.
Oh, okay. I think it spans throughout the entire journey, like not even just awareness of new customer acquisition, but it extends well beyond post-purchase behavior, especially when you consider about, the tutorials, the demos, the features, the new features in particular that the brand is putting out, right, to increase adoption, increase usage, increase frequency of usage, right? We talked about that on a previous episode when it comes to customer-based retention and marketing strategies. But also, the other thing to keep in mind here is that the brand generated content is a jumping off point for market generated content, for employee generated content, and customer generated content. It does set the stage for all of that, especially market generated content, which is content that's being put out there by the market itself. So think about it as external studies, commissioned and non-commissioned, right? Commissioned, Forrester, Gartner, pay to play environments. Non-commissioned, really, truly unbiased, authentic interpretations and analyses of what you do, how good you are, and what place you have in the market as far as serving it is concerned. And same thing with influencers come into market generated in some capacity too, right? Non-paid influencers in particular here, and user generated content. That's all market generated at the end of the day. It can come from consumers and customers. It can come from employees, but there's plenty of influencers and user generated content that can be created on your behalf just naturally from people that will never buy from you. Those thought leaders that are in the market, that are part of those think tanks, that are part of those peer communities that, are really trying to better the community that they serve. So I think those two kind of play hand in hand as far as brand and market are concerned. And really, market just is building off of brand generated content throughout the entire journey.
Oh, market generated content is different. I think it serves more as like a verification. Like this is where I feel like this is where like good marketing happens. Like if you can really crack the code to this, like this is the community influencers. Like, have you done the right research? Are you working with the right people to spread influence on your brand? Like, is there buzz about your brand in certain communities? Like, what are people saying? Do they like your product? Do you not like your product? Like if you can really figure out the right content for this pillar, I guess we'll call it, I think that this is probably the biggest win out of all of it, because employee generated content, like you can kind of force their hand in some capacity. Customer generated content, like you can curate that to feel more controlled by the brand, like customer, like G2 reviews, shit like that. Like it's a lot of balancing what's fake, where I think that the market generated content is generally going to be the most authentic. I mean, you're looking at lower production value materials, a heavy social presence, a heavy community presence, people at conferences saying the right things, picking the right communities to be a part of is a big part of that. Whether it's online, offline communities. But I do think that if that's a probably the most difficult nut to crack, but also probably one of the most fruitful if you can figure it out.
You bring up a good point about like conferences though. So last year we had Will go to SaaStr, right, in San Francisco. I think it was like September time period. And he took a picture on his iPhone and sent it back to us of, there was like a slide from somebody's presentation with the top 10 communities out there. And what did we do? We took that and we joined them and we started to see what they were all about. Like that information probably existed somewhere out there, but in a consolidated, concise format in front of an audience that is captivated and right in line with the ICP. Like that's an offline activity that is market generated, that has huge reach. So I think there is something to be said about online, offline viewing of this material as well.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is like besides like going after a specific influencer play, like every like owned, earned, and bought, like there's gray lines between all of these, right? So market generated content being part of the right communities, part of that is like customer stuff, right? Or sorry, employee generated, right? So like having
Yeah.
your CEO in the right group, having your CMO in the right group and saying the right things, because it's a much more one-on-one scenario. But like being in those groups, like the reason you're in those groups is not to beat out your brand messaging, because that's like talk about being authentic. That's the first place that you're going to get torn apart for it, right? Like you go into Exit 5 and start claiming you're a B2B marketing agency, like they'll turn you down in a second because they know exactly what you're trying to do. Versus if you're actually in there and listening and trying to help people resolve issues that they have and genuinely are there to help people, you're going to make a much larger impact than just saying like, oh, we just did this case study with this client and drove these results. If you want these results, like reach out to us. Like that shit'll never work there.
Yeah, and I think before we move on from market generated content, I think that's the point that is important to just reinforce, because what you said earlier and what we have in our notes is that part of the purpose of market generated content is to validate brand claims. And that's absolutely accurate. I think the important piece here is it has to be as authentic as possible. Like it can't be so skewed towards, yeah, we got a Forrester report, we got a Gartner report, we got this IDC report, we got all these, these 10 commission studies that we paid for in this year's budget, and we're going to flaunt them out there and through all of our distribution channels. People see through that because it's not truly authentic. They know it's a pay to play world out there. And yeah, did Gartner and Forrester do their research and validate many of the claims that you put out? Yeah, sure shit they did, but like it's not a true authentic source of trust that it's coming from, because everybody sees through that. Everybody know it's commissioned studies versus, the influencers, the UGC content, the content that is just naturally being put out in trade publications that talk about what you offer in a non-biased way. Like you have to strike that balance.
It's interesting because you say everybody sees through that. The other thing is like not everybody sees through that.
Correct.
I mean, let's be honest, like we get leads from Clutch. There's so many paid, like, I don't know. It is shocking to me that those business models are as successful as they are, you know?
Yeah, and I have a opinion on this too. When don't I have an opinion? I think this goes back to what we were talking about previously as it relates to personas, though. I think marketing executives and decision makers buy into the hype of validating a potential supplier or product or service provider via these commission studies more so than the influencers and the champions that are lower on the totem pole, whether that's a manager or a director, right? That are ultimately going to be affected most directly by the purchase that is being made by the business. But I believe that executives are more likely to be swung towards a product and towards a business by these commission studies than those that are beneath them in the organizational structure.
Well, in part, it's like proof that your company is not a rinky-dink shit product, right? Like, let's be honest. Like, you're not paying for Forrester, you're not paying for G2, and you're not paying for Clutch if you don't have the business and the client base to support the expense to be on those, right?
Devil's advocate could say that you're going to pay for it to make a jump because you have a subpar product, but you're trying to do something to get ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, the money's got to come from somewhere, though.
Well, fair point. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, I think in the agency world, I think a lot of like small independent, like basically contractor agencies, are just not going to invest in that type of stuff. They're not going to be able to get the reviews necessary because that's the other thing. Like you could pay for it and then you have to basically push people to review the product after that. So like whether you're on the top 50 list, I don't know, the top 10 CRM softwares, right? Like you could pay to get on that list, but your reviews still have to support it.
which is why it comes back to the next pillar of creating advocates specifically as it relates to employees, right? Harnessing the power of employees, giving them the opportunity to craft their own narrative, to grow professionally and personally by being active in communities, having their own points of view, their own opinions. And the note that I took on this subsection of our notes is like, you cannot control that. You cannot govern what somebody is going to say, how they're going to say it, or any level of involvement whatsoever. Because as soon as you do that as the brand, you are creating a layer of inauthenticity by that individual.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll find that it's hard to tell people what to do. I mean, looking at good companies though, because I mean, this is huge in like the SaaS space where these guys jump from like product to product to product. Like you can tell whether or not somebody's like bought into something or like bought into a vision of a company and they like really want to work there versus, hey, I'm doing our employee advocacy program and resharing things that I'm supposed to reshare versus like, hey, I'm super passionate about this product. I think you see that a lot more in startups where in like the larger organizations, you'll see a lot more just like, I don't know, sharing crap, which is kind of fun to watch.
It's a cultural thing at the end of the day, though. Like you have to, it's a cultural mentality that you want your employees to be bought into the vision of the company. You want to do well by them. So that way, wherever they hang out, they are speaking well of you. If that's flaunting the brand on social or posting regularly on social or in their private communities, but also translates to offline. Like they are part of their own niche communities out in the real world, and they're going to say good things or they're going to say bad things about you. Yeah, this is the shittiest place I've ever worked. Don't buy from them. Like their product is subpar. They suck. Like the corporate overlords are just telling me what to do on an ongoing basis versus somebody that's like, no, this is the best place I've ever freaking worked. I love what they do. I love what we offer. Like if you are in the market or if, your business is in the market, like definitely, let me know and I'll connect you with, the head of sales or the head of product. They'll be happy to jump on a call with you. It's all cultural at the end of the day. The other thing too, just real quickly, the other thing too that I wish more brands would do is to take advantage of promoting their own employees. Like have more faces out in the crowd, webinars, virtual events. Like don't just have it be a sales guy. Don't just have it be, the product lead on the webinar talking about all the great new freaking features out there. Like it's the same shit, different day. Like it's the same dull droning of noise in the room rather than creating an uproar of individuals that can just speak so well on your brand's behalf. Now, am I saying like flaunt out the head of HR or like the HR manager of your group? Like, no, like definitely give them the opportunity to be in the right space based off of what they do, but encourage it. Give that cultural encouragement to be out there.
So you talked a lot about employee advocacy in this scenario, which I actually am going to disagree with you on like maybe not disagreeing with you on the forcing the hand, but I think it's going to be one of those scenarios for certain employees that it's sink or swim. So employee advocacy is one thing, having your CMO, your CEO, like people actually passionate about the brand kind of coming from a very authentic perspective. But then the other side is social selling. Like quite frank, like you can't be an effective salesperson without being able to do effective social selling in this day and age. Like the cold email and the cold outreach, cold calls, like that kind of stuff. Like it doesn't work for a lot of stuff. You're basically playing a volume game to get lucky. You're not getting people to know, like, and trust your brand. And I think that as a salesperson, like you need to be able to get people to know, like, and trust your brand by engaging with prospects on certain social channels. Like LinkedIn is a big one, liking their content, joining in their conversations, like getting them to know, like, and trust you as a person so that you can effectively sell to them when that time comes. And that's where I do think salespeople need to be able to do that. And like that's employee generated content, right? Like, that's where you also have to be extremely authentic. Like this was like Lavender teaching people how to write emails, and what they were talking about for like LinkedIn outreach is like you would never do anything in LinkedIn outreach that you wouldn't do in a text message. Like that's how people communicate on LinkedIn. So you're tailoring your copy and your content to feel more authentic to match the channel. And like that piece, like I said, with salespeople, that's sink or swim. Like you're either going to be able to do that effectively, you're going to play the volume game, miss your quota, and move on to your next position.
It translates to other non-sales roles though too. Like you have to be able to sell yourself. You want to, or you should be seeking to be like and trusted and whatever the rest of your cliche was there. Just as an individual person, like that most people want to feel that way through the course of life. And at some point you got to sell yourself, right? Whether you're going to get a loan, whether you're going to buy a house, whether you're getting married, right? Putting your kid, nurturing your kids through parenting, right? It's all part of the process of selling something, right? You definitely go through stages of your life where you have to sell something, whether it's information or yourself. Everybody's a salesperson at the end of the day. Everybody's got that hustle culture, or they should.
Oh man, you're going to hurt a lot of people there. There's a lot of people who will want to move to our 4-day work week and work 3 hours and get paid $180,000 a year.
Sell me on it.
Sell me on it. This is true.
You said something, and I didn't take it down as a note, but it was a good jumping off point towards the last pillar of customer generated content. I think it was around social selling and putting yourself out there. And when we think about that, right, how do we encourage our customers once they're in the door and are really seeing the value of working with us to become our own advocates? Again, in a non-controlling way, in a non-authoritative way, right? We don't want to control the narrative. We don't want to tell them, hey, write it this way because this is what we want you to say. No, we want you to be out there and as authentic as possible, and really proactively being as authentic as possible without us telling you to do so. Like we want to encourage it, right? It's that cultural philosophy. And I feel myself saying right about like 100 times in this podcast again. So I can't wait to see how James edits that out. But it is about that peer-to-peer referral, word of mouth. I feel like I'm super valued by working and buying from this organization, and I want to spread the good word externally on their behalf.
I think the thing here is you have to ask. Like to your point, you're not telling customers what to say, but there's nothing wrong with ask good customers, like asking for reviews, asking for referrals. Like I think that there's like this misconception that like some of this stuff is going to happen. Like and don't get me wrong, yes, if your customers really like your product, they're going to refer you on their own, but they're more likely to refer your product if you ask them to. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking.
Think about how many D2C, consumer packaged goods, any of those more consumer side brands that when you get something in the mail, right, from Amazon, from whatever, brand is shipping to you, like you open that box, there's typically some level of like, hey, tell us about your experience, share it on XYZ platform, right? There's like 3 options: Google, Amazon, not Yelp, but whatever. The same thing holds true with B2B. To your point, James, you just need to ask, give them some direction to hopefully allow them to do so, and let them control the narrative of how they want to write it. So.
Yeah, just make sure your product is good enough that they write good things.
Right. You can only shine a turd so much. It's a turd. So we talk about 4 pillars, right? We talk about brand generated, market generated, employee generated, and customer generated content. All of those sources of trust that should be taken into account within a content marketing strategy. There's got to be a balance between all of those 4 pillars though, James. So what, in your opinion, is the right percentage of priority that should be given to each of those pillars?
So, like any answer in marketing, it starts with depends, and it depends on your persona and buying committee. Because if you have a larger, you know, if there's only a couple, I don't know, say you're targeting Fortune 500 companies and there's only 500 decision makers, like, and there's thousands of influencers, like you're going to build that strategy more around around the influencers than the actual decision makers. And I think that you have to take a look at where your customers are, where they're consuming information, and make your best judgment based on where they hang out and who they're listening to.
Very diplomatic of you.
I mean, there isn't an answer to that, right? Like, oh, you should spend 80% on brand and make it really awesome, or you should only ask for employee reviews and start a pyramid scheme of customer generation kickbacks. Like, sorry, neither of those are the answer. I can tell you that much.
That's why I was going to.
I mean, if there's an area of focus, I think that if you could, like I said before, if you can crack the nut of market generated content and make sure that you have the right people talking about you, because in every business, it's all about who you know. And, you have to make sure that you know the right people and the right people are talking about you.
Yeah, I agree that there's a big, in asterisks, it depends answer to this percentage allocation question that I threw at you. And on the flip side of that, I agree with you that there's plenty of things that we can say don't do. Like, don't overinvest in brand generated content at the sacrifice of customer generated and employee generated and market generated. Like, don't be like 80% here and then 20% to the other three pillars. Like, that's not a well-balanced, well-rounded content strategy when it comes to trust building. Am I saying that you want to go 25% across the board here too? No, it comes back to your market. It comes back to how they buy, who they trust for their sources of information. But what I do know is that not enough brands have that diversity of mix within their content strategy. They are so heavily focused on brand generated content with a market generated content kind of closely behind. They don't invest in customer generated content. And if they do, they don't take advantage of it through their distribution channels. They don't flaunt it out there through paid, through organic, through email, through webinars, right? They don't take advantage of the content that is truly able to resonate with the audience through authenticity and, truly kind of bring it to the next level. They are just overly focused on their own material at the end of the day. And I think that's the biggest shortcoming that led us into this conversation.
Yeah. The summary of this is like, be more authentic. Like, it's okay to do a short form TikTok style video. Like, people love that stuff. It comes off as more authentic. People are more likely to trust it and less likely to, I don't know, I guess, see through it in the way that they do some of the other things that brands are focused on. Like, we spend so much of our time, effort, budget on creating these high quality, like, it's almost the same problem that we have of like, are you shooting for perfection or are you shooting for good enough? Because perfection is almost like no longer a good thing in my mind. It's somebody, a great example, somebody posted around like getting better results from ads that have misspellings in them, because it seems like it comes more from, it seems like it comes more from it seems more authentic. Like, there's a person behind it. It doesn't have perfect grammar. We're not debating which type of comma we need to use, like all the stuff like that. It's putting a face over a video is a good thing. It comes off as more authentic, and you need to make sure that you're adapting your messaging to the channel that it's on.
Exactly. The delivery of your content and your messaging needs to be authentic. It can't feel forced. It can't feel overly professional or corporate. Like, be a human. Don't be a robot. That's why people will buy from people at the end of the day, is because they see a human connection and they can see that there's a level of trust that is capable of being built there. And that is how we're going to end today's episode. So, like, subscribe, love us, connect with us on social. Check out dragon360.com, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.